Welcome to the third and final podcast on Euro 2020. And this one is dissecting the knockout stage and, of course, previewing tomorrow's showpiece game, the UEFA Euro 2020 final between England and Italy at the home of football in Wembley Stadium. We will also see which players our pundits and commentators have put in their teams of the tournament. All this is packed into one on the Commentary Hub, the home of alternative commentary. Well, it's been an exciting 29 days of competition. We've seen 140 goals in 50 matches, surpassing the 108 scored in 2016. We've seen new records being made both individually and as a team, with history being made. Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, has become the European Championships record goal scorer. We've also seen the likes of Switzerland, Ukraine, and England make history by reaching the competition the furthest in their entire history. And we've also seen the highest amount of own goals, with 12 being scored in this tournament alone. We began with 24 teams. Now 2 remain. It's England and Italy who are left standing, and Sunday night will be one to decide who will be the European champions. Will it come home for England, or will it, for the first time in its history, or will it go to Rome for the first time since 1968? You will find out who wins on the Commentary Hub as we bring you coverage from the final tomorrow from 7:30, as it is one for your diary and is a game that you do not want to miss alongside our coverage. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road for the final time this tournament. And with me to talk all things Euro 2020 as ever are our pundits and guests. So starting from top left all the way down to the bottom there, we've got Russ Vernon in the top left, as you can see there. We've got Mike Harneman to his right. We've got John Kane, who is just above me. Barry Swain is just below Russ. We've also got Nicholas to my left, right in the middle. And last but not least, we have Jack Cunningham down below. So let's start off by just sort of talking about the European Championships as a whole. John, I mean, you've seen a lot of these European Championships in your lifetime. Where would you rank this tournament in particular as opposed to sort of the previous ones that you've seen?
Thanks, Matt, and for making me feel like really old. And, no, I must admit, I mean, especially with the pandemic that has been going on beforehand and lack of spectators, as we've seen, I have to be honest that before the tournament, I wasn't expecting it to be a really good tournament. I thought it was going to be one of the ones that's going to just pass by just for the sake of it and then gone. But I have to admit, in my lifetime, it's actually been probably the best European finals that I've seen. It was just full of excitement. You know, it's most of the games that I've watched, that literally you were glued to the TV, just not like some games, this is a boring game and this and that. No, everything was good. And the best thing about it, obviously, is actually England is in the final for the first time, which actually made our nation a bit more exciting than ever before.
Yeah, first time in 55 years that England have reached the major final. And the first time in their history they've reached the European Championships. Don't worry, John, I won't ask you how many tournaments that you've seen, given, of course, I've already referred to your age.
I can tell you if you want.
Anyway, we'll have a little guessing game just at the bottom. I'll go to Barry. I mean, obviously, we saw in the last tournament in 2016, it was pretty much sort of defensive football was the real outcome and the real story of the tournament. As sort of France 2016 was, really not the most exciting to watch. It still did have its compelling games. It was still gripping in terms of obviously Portugal winning and having a shock winner, you could say. But of course, we have still seen that this tournament. We've seen a lot better football. We've seen a lot of surprises. We've seen a lot of the big boys go out very early on. And it's been a tournament, you could almost say to some extent, full of surprises, hasn't it?
Yeah, full of surprises. I think the defensive element of 2016 has rolled over, but we've seen a lot of good attacking football. I think I said in the last podcast, the two best defences could well profit in this tournament, and that
seem to have just lost Barry there for just a split second there. So of course, I'll wait for him to get back, and I'll just throw that question to Mike, just sort of if you like to add anything to sort of what Barry was trying to get across before obviously he was cut short due to connection issues.
Yeah, so obviously it's been a really good tournament, really, and there's been a few games where you've seen the defence come out on top. If you look at the game between, I think it was Spain and Switzerland, and a couple of the other games as well. But it's been a really attacking tournament, lots of quality on show, a couple of surprise results, and surprising nations that have gone far as well. So overall, I've really enjoyed the tournament, and I think that it's great that England are in the final, of course, as well. And England, have started to grow into it as well. Of course, in the group stages, there was a game against Scotland, who obviously come to Wembley and defended really, really well. But other than that, England have kind of grown into it really throughout. And the game against the Ukraine was a fantastic performance. And then the last game as well against Denmark to show the character to come from 1-0 down. And it shows that that's a really together group, and a group that can take a little bit of adversity and still bounce back and get over the line and get a positive result.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we will delve into England and their opponents Italy tomorrow in the Euro 2020 final. But of course, Nicholas, you can't forget as well that on the first Saturday of the tournament, literally what we're talking now, sort of, four weeks ago, of course, Christian Eriksen unfortunately collapsed, suffered a cardiac arrest, which almost looked like it was going to maybe overshadow the tournament. It was going to be for a little bit of time, going to plague into real sort of insignificance. It was a bit irrelevant, but obviously he pulled through and obviously, is okay and is obviously alive and everything else, which is obviously a fantastic sight, obviously, no doubt. But it's almost just felt that moment hasn't stopped anything really, has it? It's just almost maybe, do you feel kind of made the tournament just be played in a better spirit than what it was probably potentially on paper?
Well, it certainly gave Denmark a lot more spirit to keep on going through the tournament, which they did. But I don't know, but it certainly pulled everyone together to think, that sometimes life is more important than just playing the game. But basically, everyone just came to help a man in need. But I think it actually brought everyone closer together, and sort of gave them, the sort of the real fighting spirit to make up to ensure that they played the tournament in the way it did. I mean, in the same way that I think it might have been John or Mike who said that it was just going to pass by, but as one of them said, it was it just gave the other tournament this kind of wow factor.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I'll go to Jack first. I mean, which sort of side in particular have you been sort of impressed by the most? I mean, obviously, the Euros sort of within the last 2 years the last two tournaments has almost been, ones where it does almost favour the bigger sides, given they've, of course, got that sort of rule in place that 4 of the best third place sides prevail out of 6. Who do you think has been the side that you've been the most surprised about during this tournament?
Well, I mean, I think surprised in a good way and a bad way. Don't think anyone was expecting France to go in the last 16. I certainly wasn't. Germany you can see they're coming towards the end of, Löw's leaving, they're coming towards the end of their cycle. That's not the best German side we've ever seen. So they disappointed me in the way of I'm expecting them to be a lot better than they were. And then in terms of teams who did better, Switzerland, wouldn't have expected Switzerland to get the quarterfinals, and then to take Spain all the way to penalties and then just turn in a horrendous penalty shootout. They could have quite feasibly been in that semi-final instead. So Switzerland were really good. Denmark, especially after losing their first 2 games, after what happened to Eriksen, etc., the way they bounced back, the way they played against Russia and Wales was just, incredible, to be fair. They totally deserved to get to the semi-final. It was a good game against England. I think from about 75 minutes onwards, they were probably trying to pay for penalties, in my opinion, and England deservedly won in the end. But still, they were brilliant. So, yeah, I think Denmark or Switzerland were good. Ukraine, don't think anyone was expecting them to go to quarterfinals. Obviously disappointing how they played against England. But yeah, I mean, probably as we sort of predicted at the start of the tournament, that Denmark would be dark horses. And I suppose it proved to be that way. They got the semi-finals and they were close to getting the final.
Well, absolutely. Given the fact, of course, what happened to Eriksen in Copenhagen, the Danish capital, of course, it's even more of an inspiring story that they even made the last 4 and took England all the way to extra time to obviously, unfortunately, fall at the semi-final hurdle. But of course, they've won friends all over Europe, not just, of course, within sort of UEFA and the football sort of world. I'll go to Russ, who's been waiting very, very patiently. I mean, I'll just sort of ask the same sort of question to you. what I was sort of saying to Jack. Have you been sort of surprised by a side it sort of impressed you that you didn't expect? And have you been sort of, disappointed by a side you expected a lot more from? What's your opinion sort of on both those sorts of sides?
Well, I was impressed with how Hungary did in their matches in the group stage. Obviously, they did very, very well, but unfortunately, they didn't get out to the group stage in the end. But I was surprised with how well they performed. Everyone thought they were going to be the whipping boys in that group, with France and Portugal in there, and obviously, and Germany as well, which obviously didn't prove to be. I was also a bit surprised with France, how far they went out. And as John mentioned, Germany, we know so sad they were in the past, coming towards an end of the era now, especially with Joachim Löw leaving at the end of which who's now left his post there. I was a bit surprised with the performances of Holland as well, especially after winning all their group games and then getting knocked out by the Czech Republic. I thought they probably made at least the one this next stage on after that, the Dutch. So I was a bit surprised with them how they did in their matches as well, Matt.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting to say the least. We'll now move on to the European Championship final tomorrow. Of course, it kicks off at 8 o'clock. Our coverage starts at 7:30. I know, of course, that JB, or John Stuttard as he's known, is, of course, going to be part of our team. Justin Hoyt, the former Middlesbrough, Arsenal and Sunderland defender, will be part of our commentary team. Of course, Russ and Mike will also be covering the final as well. Of course, if you are just tuning in, of course, it's Russ in the top left and Mike on the middle, the top, who will be covering the final. I'll go to Barry first. I mean, obviously, let's look from the England perspective. Sort of the big news coming through, 25 of the 26 trained today. Phil Foden missed out with a minor knock at his believe. Doesn't believe to be too serious. Is that something that you read into and read into with a lot of panic? Or do you maybe think that, everything is not as bad as what maybe it's in some people's minds?
I don't know. It could be mind games, couldn't it? I don't think Phil Foden will start. I think he had a good start to the tournament. He's been used sparingly since. So I don't think he'd be starting. I don't think Gareth Southgate would be too bothered by the fact that he's carrying a slight knock. It's probably a precaution. He'll probably be on the bench, I reckon, if he's there or thereabouts. But I don't think he'll start. I don't think it'll be too much of a concern. And they've been very lucky, England, haven't they, in terms of suspensions, injuries, and so forth. They haven't really suffered at all, have they, so far? And that's been a big plus. Sometimes you need that little bit of luck in a tournament, and they've literally ridden all the way through on a wave without really picking up any knocks at all.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very, very good point that you've made as well. Of course, there was that sort of worry where Chilwell and Mount had to isolate for 10 days after they had got in contact with Billy Gilmour, who tested positive for COVID, but that has not affected the England squad one bit. John Kane, I mean, Mike made a very good point earlier on, didn't he, that how it feels like England have got a lot better as the tournament's progressed. And the group stages, yes, we'd got 2 wins from 3 clean sheets, but there was still a bit of a, we're waiting for the real England to turn up. Against Germany, it was a real tactical slog, which England really prevailed in. And obviously, Ukraine was one of the most faultless performances I think I've seen England produce in a major tournament match. And against Denmark, they did eventually get over the line, in which they did get better as the game sort of went on. How have you felt with England during the tournament? Have you think they've got better as the tournament's gone on?
Very much so. The thing with England is they got the job done in the end day. It doesn't have to be pretty. At times wasn't pretty, as we've seen, especially in the group stages. But I mean, against Denmark, the one thing they've showed against Denmark is actually when they gone to extra time, they were the only team who were going for it. Even when they're 2-1 up, they were mentally and physically seemed to be much, much more got great capability than we were aware of, if that makes sense. Because the Danes were completely drained in extra time. And that just shows how good the England team was. But before the tournament, I did mention that I don't think the England team were ready to win this tournament, but they would be ready for the next World Cup, which is not next year. But to get to this stage with my prediction, I think is fantastic, because they only needed the players to gel a bit more and to get a bit mature. We got players like Calvin Phillips, that he actually came in the squad, and his youngster, and obviously his role with Declan Rice, that was proved to be vital. And I'm sure Barry mentioned it before as well in the last podcast. They're very important players to have them in front of the back four. And in the beginning, you think, right, how's that going to work? But it worked perfectly, got the job done. Like I said, it wasn't pretty at times, but in the end of the day, in football, it doesn't have to be pretty to get to the final.
Absolutely, and we've obviously seen that with the European Championships. Took at Portugal 5 years ago. It wasn't pretty. They got the job done. They knew the role, and of course, their big game experience really counted, didn't it? I mean, Jack, let's talk about Gareth Southgate, because he got before the tournament. There was a lot of hope, but there wasn't a lot of full confidence in him. He certainly changed people's opinions, including my own. So I will hold my hands up and say that he has completely got me wrong. I think I'm not the only one who will be saying that based on this tournament. What do you think has been the real sort of strength of Gareth Southgate? Because his man management has been absolutely superb. He's obviously not used the likes of Chilwell, Connor Cody. Of course, the two goalkeepers haven't been used in the tournament. Ben White's not been used. But, you know, they've obviously had that team spirit created by Southgate that's just phenomenal for me. But it almost feels like as well, tactically, England have just been so switched on. You know, they've dealt with different teams, you know, to get here more than I think the Italians have. They've played against, you know, a Denmark side that were very much tiring, as John alluded to, and they got over the line, did the job. You know, against Ukraine, they were dominant from the start. They're adaptable. They're versatile in any system. Do you think that, you know, without Southgate in charge, England don't get to the final?
I think Southgate is the perfect man for the England job. I don't think he's necessarily the best manager around, but I think for what you need as an England manager, he's absolutely ideal. He's someone that the country can get behind. The media are very in favour of him. It's not like when we had Capello and he divided sections of the media, etc. So the way he speaks about issues such as discrimination in football and gay pride, that has translated into the squad, because the squad is a likeable squad. I can't remember a more likeable England squad, to be honest. You go through them, and there's all these moments like when Kane scored against Germany, and there's that video of Rice trying to run off and celebrate, and he just goes down with cramp, and it's just like, you know, how can you not like that? You know, it's hard. So Southgate's fostered this team. I love the way he involves the likes of Aaron Ramsdale. Like at the end of the game against Denmark, he was speaking to Ramsdale for ages, even though Ramsdale was relegated with Sheffield United last season. Didn't have his best season at all, but he's in the England squad through, you know, not choice, just
Henderson
necessity.
being injured as well.
Exactly. And he's just been made to feel part of it, and they're all made to feel part of it. And it's the whole squad is behind Southgate. Also got to give credit to Southgate's coaches. I think Graham Jones might be getting a permanent England job, unfortunately, the way he's done with England. Might be leaving Newcastle already, but we'll have to see what happens with that one. So you've got to give him credit for the team he's got around him, the way he's dealt with Harry Maguire, for example. Maguire got sent off against Denmark, obviously, last year in the Nations League, and it was after the Greece incident, and it looked like, oh no, this is Maguire could be coming towards the end, but he's just looked after him, told him, you know, you're still in the England squad, you're my number one guy, and look how he's returned the faith in the manager. I mean, he's been an absolute man mountain, hasn't he, since he's come back? So Southgate deserves all the credit. And again, I wasn't a one who was like fully in the Southgate camp. I thought we were a bit lucky in 2018, to be honest, the way we got the semi-final, but there's been nothing lucky about this. We deserve to be in the final, and Southgate is the perfect man to be the England manager.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't disagree with any of those points that you've made, of course. Remember, do get in touch on the various sort of outlets that we're on, of course. We're on the Commentary Hub YouTube page. We're on Mike Harneman's personal YouTube page. We're also on both our Commentary Hub YouTube channels, 1 and 2, on JB Sports. Commentary Hub on Periscope. We're also on JDAC Football, which is John Kane's Arabic commentary, of course, which is also providing an alternative service tomorrow for the European Championship final, if you, of course, are of that sort of language. If that's your preference, from Russ Vernon's personal Twitch and the Football Commentary Live Twitch as well. Mike, what have you made of Southgate's handling of the squad? I mean, obviously, we've seen Foden get some minutes at the start of the tournament. As Barry said, he's been used sparingly since. Jack Grealish has made more appearances from the bench when there's been a lot of calls for him to put him in. He's resisted that temptation. He's put Bukayo Saka in, who's fared well in his games. He put Jadon Sancho in against Ukraine, which was a real sort of bold out of the blue, if you like. How have you think he's dealt with the situation? Because obviously, you know, Tyrone Mings played the first 2 games. He kept 2 clean sheets. He didn't have to put Maguire in, but, you know, as Jack Cunningham alluded to, a lot of faith shown in him. How have you found his management of that squad in the sort of 29 days that we've had of this tournament?
Yeah, I think Gareth Southgate has done exceptional, really. I think he's been really, really good in terms of, you know, sort of changing it up when needed. Of course, he's had, you know, a couple of games, or I think at least a game with a back 5 as well, where Kieran Trippier come in, and obviously, that moved Kyle Walker to centre back, and that worked as well. And then if you look at, he's played the likes of Harry Kane, even though Harry Kane was struggling for goals at the start of the tournament, but of course, playing him, he was able to get into the right areas, the right positions, and play himself into form. You look at the likes of Luke Shaw as well. Luke Shaw, who a couple of seasons ago, you would have looked at him and said, he wouldn't be in the England side, and now he's probably one of the first names on the team sheet. Calvin Phillips as well, Declan Rice. There's a lot of really good players in there, and Gareth Southgate has managed them all really well. Harry Maguire, as was mentioned, John Stones, Tyrone Mings. I think he's managed it, pretty, faultlessly almost. In regards to the sort of kind of tactics and the things that people were questioning, he seems to have got a lot of them right, and giving these different players minutes like Bukayo Saka, Jadon Sancho as well. Jack Grealish was mentioned. He's come on off just sort of an impact sub, and Jordan Henderson as well.
Yeah,
that was it was nice for Gareth Southgate to get that bit of recognition. 3-0 up against Ukraine, bring on Jordan Henderson, and then the sub gets a goal as well. So that's his first goal for England, of course. So that was nice for him to get his first goal, and a bit more recognition for Gareth Southgate. But I think Jack kind of summed it up well in regards to the last tournament. We did get a bit fortunate, the teams we were facing, but in regards to how we performed in this tournament, we've beaten the Germans, we've beaten the Ukraine, beaten Denmark, we've beaten some good nations along the way. So, yeah, I think Southgate's managed it really, really well.
There almost feels like, doesn't there, Nicholas, that whenever England in major tournaments would play these bigger nations, I mean, look at the Germany game in particular, where, everybody a few years ago would have gone, oh, no, it's the Germans. It almost feels like we're going to lose before we've even kicked the ball. But there's that real sense of, before that game, we're going to finally do it. It's been a long old time. 55 years was the last time, obviously, we sort of beaten the Germans in that time, of course. Since 1966, we'd of course beaten them in Euro 2000 as well. So obviously, but how have you sort of assessed that mentality change of England? It almost feels like now that we play these nations, we'll play Italy tomorrow, but it's a different dynamic. There's no real fear. It's almost a case of we want teams to be more fearing of us. Is that what you kind of think as well?
Quite possibly, but from what I've heard, Southgate is a pretty good tactician. He knows how to get his men together to go through the games, and so he can pick out what would be the best way to attack, and also who would be the best to defend against these nations. I mean, it's amazing, what he's come up with throughout this tournament, and the England players now must feel like they can take on anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does certainly feel like that. And that's sort of the whole mood with the country, isn't it? Russ, I mean, talking about Southgate's management, he's a manager who's had a lot of faith in a lot of players. Look at Raheem Sterling. He's kept a lot of faith with Harry Kane, who's absolutely flying since that goal against Germany, 2 against Ukraine, and of course scored in the semi-final, the winner, of course, against Denmark. He's kept a lot of faith for certain players as well. Calvin Phillips, of course, had a lot of sort of, shall we say, skeptic criticism that he was starting for England, but it just shows with Southgate that, a lot of people have almost had to eat their words by the fact he's stuck by Sterling. He's given Pickford the chance in goal. Phillips has been superb. Declan Rice as well. And he's almost just said to everyone that, look, stick with me and these players will come through in an England shirt, hasn't he?
He has, yes. And honestly, when you look at the games as well, and a lot of people, when they see Henderson on the side ready to come on, they're thinking he's going to be Calvin Phillips coming off rather than Declan Rice, because with Phillips playing that bit further forward, in which he'd be asking Henderson to do. But more or less, every single game when he's finished, Henderson has kept Phillips on, moved Phillips back into Rice off, and maybe he sees Phillips can play that bit further forward, but then if need be, he can drop back and allow Henderson to get that role. And when you see the midfield from England, whichever it picks, whether it's Rice and Phillips, which has been starting, I think that'll be the starting partnership again tomorrow against Italy. When you watch at both of those play, you can see if Rice goes forward, Phillips knows to drop back and just stay just behind him and we've got that good understanding in the midfield. And a lot of people at the start of the season, Justin Knight admitted it after the Denmark game on air to me that he was one of the people who didn't think Calvin Phillips was going to be good enough and him and Rice can play together. And a lot of people have said that. I know, Jack, I know you said that a couple of times in the past in this group chat that we've had, that you don't think those two can play together and do well in a partnership together. But in what we've seen over the tournament, I think a lot of people now, including Justin Knight, says he likes how both Rice and Phillips can work together, and I think it's going to be a good game to win. I think if we can get that midfield right, we'll get back onto it in a bit more detail later. But I think if Rice and Phillips have another good game, like they have done against Germany, like they did against Ukraine, win the midfield battles, I think we could potentially do it tomorrow. And I'm still saying, like I did before the tournament, England's going to win it tomorrow.
England is going to win it according to Russ. I think there's a lot of people certainly sharing that same viewpoint, of course, but what we do know is it will be a very, very tough game against the Italians. John, I mean, look at Harry Kane before he came into the tournament. Everybody recognised him as this great player for Tottenham Hotspur. I think it was fair to say the group stages weren't kind to him. Obviously, he looked, I guess at times you could say he was tired. He plays a very different role to what he has at Tottenham this season. It is almost the England team almost goes to him rather than he goes to them in terms of dropping back, linking up with the midfield and then sort of playing balls across to the fullback areas. It is almost that, they expect Kane to be the last point of attack rather than, whether it's Heung-min Son or Lucas Moura for Tottenham, as you sort of well know. But he made that very good point, didn't he, Gareth Southgate? And it is very much echoing Alan Shearer in Euro 96, where he didn't score, I think, for about 2 years. And Euro 96, he, scored, I think, 5 goals in the tournament and absolutely shone, didn't he? It almost feels like with Harry Kane that he scored that goal against Germany. He just hasn't looked back since. He's been an absolute revelation, hasn't he? And that's the old Harry Kane that we've grown to see over the last sort of 5-6 years when he was playing for Tottenham under Pochettino and Jose Mourinho.
I think you're absolutely spot on when he said that it's 2 different roles that he actually played between England and Spurs. And I actually did say it in a few games when obviously people start talking about Harry Kane and not being up to his best in the group stage. And I was more like sometimes shouting on the TV. I'm saying, just drop deeper. That's what he did. And normally you see him some of the times. I mean, let's not forget Harry Kane is top goal scorer in the Premier League and the top asset player in the Premier League as well. Yeah. So, and he actually uses his ability to go back so many times and pass the ball to Son. In England, he could have done that for Sterling. Now, it worked in a way because Sterling was actually our top goal scorer in the group stages, wasn't he? He actually scored both goals for us. But for once, I mean, and I'm saying here as a Spurs fan, I was actually worried that actually a move to or possibility of moving to Man City, which the bid being rejected by Daniel Levy, may have affected him a bit. And I still stand with that maybe something was in his head. And then come the game against Germany, I got a feeling they pulled them aside and they said, look, if that's the case, forget about that. This is Germany we're talking about. Let's make history. Let's beat the Germans. And you're absolutely spot on. The minute he actually scored against Germany, after that, it's just been Hurricane show, wasn't it? Literally.
Yeah. Well, it literally has. I mean, scored against Germany, 2 against Ukraine, and of course he scored in the semi-final against Denmark. Can he add to the tournament? Of course, he's still fighting for the Golden Boot, which is currently being held by both Patrick Schick and Cristiano Ronaldo. Barry, in terms of how we look at this tactically from a standpoint tomorrow, do you feel as though maybe Southgate could, potentially throw a spanner in the works? I mean, obviously, you've seen in some finals where you've seen a surprise name on the team sheet. I mean, it's not going to be quite the same with England or sort of the comparison I'm using. But you look at Chelsea, 2012, of course, they did have a lot of injuries and suspensions. And, of course, I do mention that it isn't the same. But, of course, they did throw a lot of surprise players in the team. Of course, he threw Bukayo Saka in against Germany when that was, a bit of a surprise. Do you maybe feel he's got that in his locker to maybe just throw a bomb and, potentially shock people with a certain call for someone in the team tomorrow? Appears as though that you're on mute, Barry, unfortunately. If you could Lift your mic up. There,
Sorry, not that. I'm doing well tonight. I've been cut off by a power cut, and now muting myself. I'll start again. Yeah, he's. I mean, obviously Sancho as well in the game against the Ukrainians a week ago in Rome. You know, that was a bit of a curveball. He'll go behind closed doors with his coaching staff. He'll have a look at Italy on on several videos, and he'll dissect the way they play. And there won't be a lot in this game tomorrow, and there might be fine margins where he's suddenly thinking, rather than a Sancho or a Sacco, he might be throwing in a curveball like a Rashford, for example, just to change something. I'm not saying that's what he will do, but he might be looking at something just a little bit different, just to pose something a little bit out of the ordinary against the Italians. You know what the Italians are going to give you tomorrow. The Italians will be sitting there in their hotel thinking, well, what are they going to do? You know, there will be that element of surprise that Gareth Southgate is capable of coming up with. Most people get an idea for 9 or 10 of the starting lineup, but you just don't know. And he's capable of flexing his muscles with the back 3, back 4, back 5. You know, he can interchange that. Everyone knows their jobs. You know, the squad is completely at ease. You know, you hear the stories of Connor Cody, marching around the dressing room, barking the orders and being the real leader, the skipper. He hasn't kicked a ball. He's not likely to kick a ball. But that epitomises what he's got. He's got that squad where he wants them. He's got their trust. And whoever he puts out there, I'm sure they'll do a job for him to win. But it's going to be a very, very tough game, a very, very tight game. And as I say, those fine margins, maybe that one little curveball. You know, he's come up with some really good decisions in this tournament, and it's very easy to just make one bad decision after all those good decisions. But if he can come up with one more good decision, he will go down in national folklore, that's for sure.
Well, absolutely. Of course, as you said, he's got his decisions absolutely bang on the money. Let's hope for everyone in the country doesn't get it wrong tomorrow and that England are European champions for the very first time. Jack, Barry made a very, very good point there that, you know, we can stand up to playing 3 at the back. We can play 4 very, very comfortably. I think that's been a real secret of the success under Southgate, how we've switched from the 3 to playing the 4 to being a bit more offensive, a bit more dominant in games. Do you maybe feel as though that we're going to be exactly the same as we did against Denmark to match up to the Italians? Or, you know, do you think maybe you might go back to that back 3 system to almost, if you like, keep their 2 wingers, you know, whether it's Chiesa or Insigne or, you know, Berardi, whoever the combination of the 2 is, you know, sort of withstand what they're doing even more? Do you think it'll be more defensive or a bit more of a controlled sort of formation like we saw against Denmark and Ukraine?
I think it's going to be a bit like what it was against Germany, with the back 3 again. Really? I know Italy don't play the wing backs, but I reckon with how keen their wing backs are their full backs are to get forward. Emerson isn't as good as Spinazzola, but there was a few times in the semi-final where he made the wrong decision. I think it was one where he had a shot and he hit the crossbar from a tight angle. He should have crossed it, but he still got forward as much as Spinazzola did. So he is going to be a threat. So I think, I don't know, obviously, but I reckon when I see Trippier in and Walker moving into centre-back, that's what I actually believe Southgate might go for. He is tended to go with safety first overall, unless it's a team like the Ukraine where he believes we're going to dominate the game, obviously. And he's not got a decision wrong so far this tournament. So and it's a final, can we? I don't know if England have the players to go out and match the Italians, how they play their football, because the way they've played since Mancini's come in has been just delicious to watch, and they're still strong defensively. So I don't know if England can do that. So I think England have to be a bit more streetwise, and I think we'll go a bit more safety first. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 3 at the back with Trippier coming in at the side.
It does feel like, doesn't it, that we are very much a streetwise side, probably the most sort of streetwise you could say since in my lifetime, really. Anyway, I'm going to go to Ross Werner now. Of course, as you can see, his screen is just sort of cut to black. I mean, obviously, we've made a very, very good point in terms of course, I'll go to him in just a minute, actually, before he comes back. I'll go to Mike for this one. Do you maybe feel as though that we could maybe put an extra man in the midfield? I mean, obviously, we know Phillips will run. I mean, the kilometres he covers every single game is absolutely astonishing. I mean, there was figures that came out for, I think, the Denmark game, and the stats that he showed, he was head and shoulders above everybody else in every department, whether it was running, chasing things down, I'll go to Mike first and then I'll go to Russ on this. Do you maybe feel as though that with Rice protecting the back four and obviously the way they play with Barella, Jorginho, Verratti, do you maybe feel as though we might have an extra man in the midfield, maybe take Mount out and put Henderson in, or do you think maybe just don't change what's worked?
I think, to be honest, I don't think there'll be an extra man in midfield, personally. I think when you look at that Italian back line as well, of course, they're not the youngest back line. They've got, I think, a 34, 36-year-old and a 32-year-old in there. So potentially, if we can use some of the younger players to exploit that, and I think Gareth will do that. And I also do agree with Jack as well. I think Kieran Trippier will probably come in at full-back and Kyle Walker will come in. And I do think it'll be a 5. So that will probably be the change rather than the extra man in midfield. But, when you look at the subs, of course, we've got Jordan Henderson there that can come on, Jude Bellingham potentially as well, if we do want to, maybe change it up a little bit, depending on how the game actually pans out.
Russ, what's your sort of thinking behind that sort of question? Do you sort of agree with what Mike is saying? Or do you maybe feel as though we could get a little bit of protection, a little bit more insurance into the middle to match the three of the Italians?
Well, actually, earlier on, I think yesterday, I did my starting 11 for what my England starting 11 would be, and I'd continue with the 4-2-3-1 formation, which we have done majority of the matches, which then could change into a 4-1-4-1 formation, and I would continue to play back 4, and well, maybe if he did were to put a 5 in, I don't see Mount starting in the back if we do go to a back 5, but I'd stick with a 4-2-3-1. I'd go with Pickford. Obviously, he'll be the first choice goalkeeper, no doubt. Tomorrow, my back 4 would be as it's been for the majority of the time with Walker, Stones, Maguire, and Luke Shaw, and then continue with Rice and Phillips because they have the understanding. Midfield trio behind the lone striker would be Saka and Sterling either side, with Mason Mount in the number 10, and then Harry Kane. But if we were to go to a back 5, out of my team, which I've just named to you just there, I'd probably say Mount would be the one to drop out, put Trippier a right wing back, then have Saka and Sterling either side of Harry Kane and go to a 3-4-3 in the formation tomorrow. For me, if Southgate were to fetch in Trippier, I'd think it'd be the Mount, and Miss Abbey would be harsh on Mason Mount after how well he's played. But I think Mount will probably start, so I think he'll stick to his 4-2-3-1 formation, and then maybe later on, if he needs to change anything, like he did against Denmark, where he fetched on Grealish, then took Grealish off, which it worked quite well. He managed that quite well, man management, get Trippier on the back, go to 5, see the game out. Maybe if we're winning 2-1 later on, 5 minutes to go, he may see the game out to the end. So I think he may start with a back 4 and then later on, if you need to change anything, go to a back 5 if we're leading later on, and ensure that defence will be later on for me, Matt.
I mean, Mike, obviously, I think you've got a burning point that you'd like to make. So obviously, over to you.
Thinking out loud, to be honest, really, in regards to if we are to keep it the same, whether that would mean Jack Grealish from the start, whether he'd get in maybe ahead of Mason Mount. I don't know what people's thoughts on that are. Whether Grealish would be, used as an impact sub still, or whether Jack would actually get on from the start and, actually try and attack him from the off.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. Certainly, I mean, the England fans have really wanted Jack Grealish, haven't they? And then they've wanted Sancho at times. They've maybe not seen them as much, but of course, when you're winning and you get to the final, I don't think a lot of people really complain about that. I'll just touch on a few more things with England before we move on to the Azzurri, the Italians, England's opponents tomorrow. Nicholas, I mean, we talk about how we've shown a lot of faith in players, but Raheem Sterling, I mean, is a contender for player of the tournament, given how much of an impact he's had for England. He's had a lot of criticism, both in the national press down the years, for the way he's portrayed himself. Harshly, I think it's the right word to describe that, in terms of what he's done and what his personal choices have been, how he lives his life, which I don't think you could really put in the limelight for. But in terms of his footballing ability, it almost feels like these Euros have rediscovered him, because at Manchester City, felt like in the last sort of second half of the season, it kind of went a bit stale for him. It didn't really work out. What have you made of Sterling throughout this tournament, and how much, I think it's very much easy to see just how thick-skinned he is and how much he's not fazed by any level of criticism. And another point as well, how much Southgate deserves a tremendous amount of respect, because he's shown a lot of faith in Raheem Sterling and he's reaping the rewards, isn't he?
Oh, he's been a cracker during this tournament, has Raheem Sterling. I mean, the way he plays, he is just one focused individual. And the way he scored, the goal against in the opening game against Croatia, just goes to show how committed he was. And he's also personally, he's a very grounded guy. And you just cannot take that away from him. Very focused, dedicated. Just kind of what you expect someone in his position to be.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very, very grounded person, of course. You have seen during the tournament as well, Sterling sort of have his position change. He played down the middle against Croatia. We saw him against Denmark very much sort of play down the middle at times, as well as coming from that left-hand side, of course, more than anything else. So just touch on the last point. I'm going to go to sort of Barry on this one, then we will touch on the Italians. Don't worry, this isn't just focusing on England, even though we are all England fans. Southgate's man management, just the last point about it. It was very much rightly alluded to that, Jack Grealish came on, then came off as soon as the second goal went in. Obviously, it just sums up his man management that, when a sub gets replaced, it does often have a bit of, sometimes gets criticised by the press or by the player themselves, but it almost felt like, Southgate after that game explained to Grealish in depth why he's made that change. And, the Villa man felt more reassured, didn't it? It just goes to show just how well he's dealt and managed that situation, doesn't it? It just shows, the way he treats people is actually phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, how many times have you seen a substitute being substituted and he storms off past the manager and has a fallout? And afterwards he said to Southgate, look, I don't care, we're in the final. And that was the right thing. Actually, do you know what? That decision was in hindsight, a very good decision. Actually, Denmark went down to 10 men. We didn't really need to do it in the end, did we? He didn't know that, and he was playing safe. When you two went up, semi-final, European Championships, you're going to do something like that. I think it was the right decision at the time, and Jack took it well. Whilst he was on the field, he done well. All those players have got 100% backing of Gareth Southgate. Gareth Southgate has picked a squad of 26 players there, and he's left some very, very good players out of that squad. It's not just a great squad in depth. You could almost put a second 11 out and you would probably beat most teams in this competition. But you actually look at the players that he's not even taken to this tournament, and the strength in depth that he's got at his disposal, it's really encouraging. But at the same time, it's still got to be managed. And I absolutely agree with what Jack said. He's the perfect manager for England. He might not be the best manager out, but he's the perfect manager for England, and he's got these players exactly where he wants them, doing exactly what he wants them to do.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, that's the focus on England. Remember, you just fire away with your comments, who you'd want in the lineup, or whatever you want to say about the England team. Do feel free to get in touch with us, of course, on the podcast. Of course, we're on both the Commentary Hub YouTube channels, Commentary Hub 1 and 2 channel. We're on Mike Harneman's personal YouTube. We're on JB Sports, our partner throughout the tournament. The Commentary Hub on Periscope, JDAC Football, of course, which is John Kane's alternative Arabic commentary service as well. Of course, we'll be providing that for the final tomorrow. Russ Vernon's Twitch and the Football Commentary Live Twitch, as much as anything else. We've got a few comments in already for us. Turton Talks Football, who's Luke Turton, our very own, on the channel. He said the strength of Gareth Southgate is not listening to outside influence, always going off his own judgment and Steve Holland's advice, which is something I think has been very, very clear to see, especially when you saw in the tournament, Steve Holland, after the Ukraine third goal, said take all the players off with bookings. He's also gone on to say, for me, Raheem Sterling and Carl Walker have been pivotal to our play, and also I'm starting to like Southgate's style of play, hoping for a 2-1 win tomorrow night, I think, as a lot of people are saying. Just before we go on to the Italians, this might bring back some memories as we go down memory lane. Ayatollah of Rock and Roll says, us Aussies will never forget that Italian taking a dive in the penalty box in the 2006 World Cup, in which Italy beat Australia 1-0 in the round of 16, for people who might remember that. And he also goes on to say, I hope England win. So it ties me in now to England's opponents tomorrow, Italy. Of course, they were touted as a side that could go all the way before the tournament started. They came into it with a phenomenal run of form. They pretty much continued that. They've been tested in games, especially in the latter stages of the competition. Whilst you say England have got better, you could say the Italians' tests have become a lot greater. They've missed one of their most influential players in Leonardo Spinazzola. Of course, he was ruled out after snapping his Achilles in the latter stages of their quarter-final win against Belgium. So it has probably left a bit of a problem area for Roberto Mancini, the Italian coach, and has pretty much got the England players, you could say, probably rubbing their hands a little bit more. I'll go to John Kane first, then I'll go to Jack Cunningham on this point. John, I mean, obviously it was very clear against Spain, the fact that, the three of Oyarzabal, Dani Olmo and Ferran Torres, played a different way to what the Italian defence are used to in terms of, obviously, they've played against powerful strikers and Bonucci and Chiellini have dealt with them well. The fullback areas, Spinazzola covers so much ground up and down the pitch. Emerson was a little bit suspect at times in the game, as Jack alluded to sort of earlier on. Do you maybe feel as though that the selection at the fullback areas is a bit of a problematic area for Roberto Mancini? And who would you go with on either flank for tomorrow's match if you were the Italian manager, John? And you're also on mute, unfortunately, John. So turn your mic off.
Very good, because I did cough to start with as well. So fantastic. We in the final is quite weird because you don't want to change tactics so much. I mean, when people talk about Jack Grealish a minute ago as well for England, I'll come back to it, but we got used to Jack Grealish coming from the sub bench. If we start him tomorrow, it's something different for the shape of the game, for the shape of the team. And you look at the Italians, the same thing as well. If you actually think, well, I'm not 100% happy with Emerson, which, to be fair, he hasn't been 100% focused on what he's doing. He might change. He's there for a reason. I mean, you look at the centre backs of Italy; they're both about 34, 36. They're quite old.
Mid-30s, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why Emerson is actually there, and he's actually more or less covering for them. And if you see it a few times, Emerson's actually helping out the back two. They don't need any help, but you see him coming back in there and helping up a bit. But the one who actually is holding that Italian team is actually Jorginho. I mean, whenever Thomas Tuchel came in Chelsea and he changed Chelsea, but he changed Jorginho. He's not the player that I've known play for Chelsea all them years. And when Jorginho is doing the play the way he's playing, it doesn't really, of course it means a lot who's playing fullback and the centre-backs. But Jorginho is actually can put that fantastic cover and still go in and support the attacking midfielders as well. So I still think if I was in Mancini, I'll stick with Emerson tomorrow because this is a game that you want to keep the momentum going. If you change it, you think it's going to make it better, it might actually backfire at you.
Very interesting point indeed. I'll go to Jack Cunningham on that point. We will talk about the Italian midfield, which has been a real key point as to why they are in the final. Jack, I mean, he's got his fullback options. No Spinazzola. He's got Rafael Toloi he can pick. He's got Giovanni Di Lorenzo who can play either side. He's got Emerson, as John said. But, sort of talking about Emerson, I'm not trying to criticise his performance, but you could tell that the lack of football for Chelsea during the season has really took its toll on him. I think his positioning, he left a lot of the inside. As John was saying, he was trying to cover both Chiellini and Bonucci because the Spanish opposition did play a lot on the floor and tried to play around the Italian defence sort of on the floor and sort of try and off the ball, be clever with their movement. What do you think about the fullback area for the Italians? Because it almost does feel like that is a bit of a weak point for theirs. How, despite their ultimate sort of good that they've got in their team as much as anything else.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Spinazzola was probably one of the players of the tournament, wasn't he? He was an absolute joy to watch. The fact he was an inverted fullback, you don't usually see that work as well as it did. But he was fantastic. I thought Emerson, again, you could tell there was one point, I think he got the ball and there was the ball through to Barella, which he eventually played when Barella was miles offside. So he saw the pass, but he was just way too late playing it. And then again, there was a cross. The cross that he put in the first half where all he has to do is pass it across the far side. And I think Chiesa would have had a tap in at the back post and he just smashed it off the crossbar from a ridiculous angle. So it was his decision making more than anything. He's definitely someone who England can get at, but he is willing to get forward as well. So they have got to deal with that. And then obviously this side, Di Lorenzo doesn't get forward as much, but he can play both sides. pretty solid option. For me, Bonucci and Chiellini are two of my favourite centre backs just in the modern game. I've absolutely loved watching them for years and years. I just love that they're both warriors, but they're also smart. They're streetwise. They know exactly where to stand. They've done it for so long. I mean, Chiellini had an ACL injury at 34, and he's come back and come straight back in that Italian side, and he's just a rock. Him and Bonucci are just genuinely absolutely fantastic centre backs, and Kane's going to have a tough time against them. I can't think of a better partnership really in international football anyway. So for me, the fullback area is weak, but I've got to emphasise how good I believe Bonucci and Chiellini are. I think for years, I mean, Chiellini was in the 2006 World Cup squad. You know, we're 15 years later. Yeah. He's still playing at the top of his game. He's just, him and Bonucci are just world class.
Well, he is literally sort of a colossus, isn't it, at the back? And if you sort of refer to sort of gladiator sort of status, if you're quite familiar with your history and the Italians and the Romans, then it certainly fits the bill with sort of Giorgio Chiellini being that warrior, isn't he? Him and Bonucci are just, you know, you even see when they sing the national anthem. I mean, they even play like that on the pitch, don't they? So what they do very much off it is what they're like on the pitch. And I mean, that rightly brings up to another point with Chiellini and Bonucci. I'm going to go to Nicholas on this one. Of course, you covered the game with me on Tuesday, Nicholas. And I mean, Bonucci and Chiellini in this tournament have been absolutely imperious, haven't they? They've withstood, you know, sort of every person that's come against them. I mean, they did it quite well against the Belgians, but against the Spanish, there was at times where I was sort of saying, you know, Oyarzabal, Olmo and Ferran Torres were making life very, very difficult for them, trying to play with speed, trying to play quick, more than what they've, you know, come up against. You maybe feel as though tomorrow that if we had, you know, whether it was Saka or Sterling or whatever the combination is, if they'd almost played alongside Kane a little bit more, you know, and they tried to go beyond the two centre-backs, you know, they could be in for a bit of a rough ride, because does it maybe feel to you they've not quite been tested enough yet?
Well, they certainly were tested against Spain, as we know, but it depends on who Southgate plays up front.
I mean, I make that point, Nicholas, because obviously you look at the goal that Morata scored. It came down, obviously, Bonucci's side. There was a massive sort of gap between him and the right back on the pitch at the time. And obviously, Morata did enough to put the ball in the back of the net. But it's something that I think England could really try and use to their advantage, isn't it?
Yes, I believe you're right. They could well do something like that to catch the Italians napping.
Yeah, absolutely, of course. And when them two have an off day, you do feel like you've got a chance in an attacking team, but that is a very, very rare occurrence. It is probably rarer than a solar eclipse, how Bonucci and Chiellini are both sort of having an off day. And I'll go to Russ on this. Let's talk about the Italian midfield, because John Kay made a fantastic point about Jorginho, and I've actually noticed that myself, how Thomas Tuchel's come in at Chelsea, and in the space of 6 months, he's just completely transformed Jorginho's game. He's almost gone from that deep-lying playmaker to almost being the sort of, you know, tough tackling midfielder that we never expected was in his game. You look at Barella, you look at Verratti, who's been, you know, good at times as well. They've got Locatelli to come from the bench, who started the first two group games and was excellent. It almost feels like the midfield battle is going to be what's going to win and lose each side of the game, isn't it? And do you feel as though that with the Italians that, you know, that is, you know, what a lot of the press are saying, that their midfield is going to be the key point as to why they win tomorrow's match?
Yes, the midfield have always been key for Italy throughout many tournaments. You can go back when they had Andrea Pirlo, when he was pulling the strings from many years ago. He was a big key part of why they won some of the things back then, and the midfield could be the key tomorrow. And if that's why I mentioned earlier, if Southgate gets it right and Phillips and Rice ups their game and stops Jorginho and the Italian midfielders playing their normal game, then why England may get the job done tomorrow. If we can stop the Italians playing through the midfield, break up their midfield play, they like to go through the midfield. So if we can stop that ball into the midfield players, make them force the play long towards the strikers, Immobile, Insigne and Chiesa, who's probably going to be the front three for Italy tomorrow, barring any last minute injury news or team news wise. That's probably going to be the front three. And if England can force them to play long towards them and keep getting them to play long balls from the back rather than play like they normally do, when England could potentially win it. And if we stop that midfield battle again, stop them from creating, because you saw against Germany, you know that when Toni Kroos gets the ball, he likes to create things for Germany. And we stopped Cruz from creating things for Germany. Phillips and Rice stopped him a few times, and I think if we can stop the Italians, Jorginho and the other midfielders in there, was probably going to start to stop creating chances, stop creating the through balls for the strikers. That's England have got a really good chance of winning it, and I think with the combination that England's got, we'll be able to stop Jorginho and then pulling strings from that midfield, and we'll have a very good chance of getting positive result tomorrow, Matt. I think the midfield, if we can stop that midfield, that's where we can win it.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, let's talk, talking about the Italian midfield, and I was speaking about Jorginho just before I went over to Russ. Barry, I mean, you have to put down Jorginho as one of the players of the tournament, don't you, with his performances for the Azzurri this tournament?
Yeah. He's done exceptionally well. And like you say, it's a masterclass really from for the new Chelsea boss. That's changed his style and technique, and he's carried it into the tournament. He's been one of the players of the tournament. For me, I think he's been outstanding and pivotal to what has been a very good Italy side. By the way, just one point to make, and I've watched probably like John and myself, being a little bit older than the rest, we've watched more than our fair share of summer international tournaments.
Thank you, Barry.
And John, changing the subject slightly, I don't know about you, but I can't ever remember watching a tournament and sitting there in the final saying, these are the best two teams, and they're in the final. And I think that's a really good thing. And it probably sums up this tournament. It's perfect. I think the best two sides are in the tournament on Sunday, and I think that really does sum up what has been a very good tournament. But yeah, he's been exceptional in that Italy midfield, and they've got some great players, and he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't say that away. And it does almost feel like that, you could say, where my interpretation, Italy have been the best side to watch, but the most tactically and effective probably have been England. So it's two ways and two different sort of angles, you could say, as to why both sides have got to the final. Mike, that midfield three for Italy, which has usually been Jorginho, Barella, Verratti, or Locatelli, as I mentioned, played against Turkey and Switzerland the first two games. It's just a nice balance, isn't it? You've got Jorginho who sits, you've got Verratti who's very much the little terrier in there, breaking play up. He almost reminds me a little bit like a Dennis Wise in the midfield. He can break play up, but he's a very good ball player, very switched on, so calm, so, just glides around the pitch, doesn't it, at times? Very much like Pirlo to that extent. And then Barella, charges forward. He runs himself into the ground. I mean, that is the one thing that is really good about this Italy team, and is the balance of that midfield three, which you don't very often see in elite club football or international football for that fact these days, do you?
No, 100%. And when you mentioned those names there as well, the likes of Jorginho and Verratti and Barella, they're all fantastic footballers that in their own right, and they've come together and gelled really well as a unit as well, and that allows the likes of Chiesa and Insigne and Immobile to do the sort of work up front. So I think they're fantastic players. I think it was John and Barry in regards to Jorginho just a minute ago about how far he's come on in terms of his ability as a player as well. He's been fantastic. I've really liked the look of Barella. I think he's been exceptional in this tournament as well. And of course, Verratti. Well, everyone knows about Verratti. He's been around for a little while as well. So they're all really, really good players. And I'm kind of questioning when I say those names and think about those names now. I'm questioning something I said earlier, whether if Italy are going to go with the three as they always do, whether Gareth Southgate might actually throw in the curveball as the third centre mid, possibly as so kind of going back on what I said earlier, maybe, yeah.
Very interesting that you could say that. I mean, looking at the two wingers, John Kane, Insigne scored that wonderful goal against Belgium, didn't he, in Munich, where he curled it from about 20 yards. Chiesa, of course, has scored both his goals at Wembley. That's not a nice thing to sort of hear or talk about just before the major final at Wembley Stadium. Of course, has scored against Austria and scored against Spain at Wembley in both the round of 16 and the semi-finals. How impressed have you been with them two? Because obviously, Chiesa, very much plays very much like his dad, Enrico, when he was playing for Parma in the sort of late 90s. He's a player that Juventus hold in high regard. There's rumours today that Bayern Munich are chasing Federico Chiesa. And obviously, Insigne's been a player for a long time with Napoli. And obviously, he's always had that potential sort of shrouding him, hasn't he, in terms of being a strong player. What have you made of them two in the tournament? And it almost does feel like with Chiesa and Insigne that any given moment they can turn the game like that.
Absolutely. Funny enough, before we spoke and we had the I've wrote which are my best 11 formation, and for me, Insania and Chiesa were there up front. I'm not saying who the third one was, but they are fantastic. Chiesa, his dad would be so proud of, because, like you mentioned, Enrico, who played for Sampdoria as well, having Sampdoria be my Italian team, and I watched him so many times live. And his son is just, he'd be so proud of with the goal that he scored, and the threat that both actually they cause, or they've caused in the tournament, and they will cause England. It's going to be massive, absolutely massive. I mean, yes, against Spain, I think Italy went as 100% as those performance-wise comparing to the other games. But I've never underestimate Italy if these two players up front. And like you mentioned, Insania, who's been faithful to Napoli for so many years as well, and being the captain as well of his club. And it's just, from an Italian perspective, if you got these two players playing on the wings and going the way they are and scoring the goals, beautiful goals as well, you think the tournament is ours, really.
Absolutely. I mean, they are going to be a constant threat, aren't they? And they're going to be two players that you really have to keep an eye on, of course. There might be a curveball in there. Berardi starting. Who knows? Of course, he's already played his part in this tournament for the Azzurri. Jack, I mean, what was the secret of the Italians in the group stages in particular was just how quick they move the ball, just how, they get it, they move it quick. Their movement is fantastic. In the latter stages of the tournament, it almost feels like fatigue has caught up with them a little bit. They've not quite been at their usual zest, zippy kind of selves. But as we know, if the Italians could turn up to play like we did in the group stages, they could hurt this England side, couldn't they, with the way they do move the ball at times?
Yes, I mean, I think if you look at Italy's progression to the final, I think the way they approached the group stage, they blew everyone away. Then against Austria, that was actually tough. And they struggled, but they got the job done in the end. Thought they played really well against Belgium, to be honest. Obviously, the last 15 minutes, they then got the old play acting out, didn't they? But to waste the time. But in terms of the way they played 75 minutes of that game, it should have been more than 2-1, in my opinion, the way they played. Spain are the only team, really, who I would say Italy ended the game not being the better team. Thought Spain actually played really, really well in that semi-final. The likes of Busquets, Pedri, Koke, all. If it wasn't for Redabal missing up them two sitters, although would Morata have scored them is another question. Probably not. So they might not have even been here. So, but they got the job done on penalties. But they also accepted quite early on, and think in that semi-final, like, right, as soon as Morata scored, I think, right, we're going to try and play for penalties now. They backed themselves on the pens, got the win. Here in the final now, I think they're going to dominate the midfield, to be honest. England don't have... The reason Spain did so well in the semi-final was because Busquets was just a genius. And then Pedri didn't give the ball away once. Koke was creating everything. England do not have, as much as Rice and Phillips have been brilliant this tournament, in terms of technique levels, they're not on that level. They're not on that level. So they're going to have to be in the face, pressing. That's the only way. You can't let Italy, you can't let Jorginho get in the gaps. You can't let Verratti get in the gaps and start splitting the lines, because that's what they'll do. I think, as I say, so the only reason Italy really struggled was because Spain had a midfield technically as good as Italy's. So the game for me will be won and lost in that midfield. If England can do what they did against Germany, where they stop Kroos and Goretzka getting on the ball, stop Jorginho, stop Verratti getting on the ball, England have a very good chance of winning. If you allow Jorginho and Verratti, etc., to dominate the game, I think England are in for a long night.
Ross, what do you make of Immobile during this tournament? Because obviously he did bag himself goals in the group stages against Turkey and Switzerland, respectively. As the tournament sort of gone on, I think you could almost say, like, some of the individual players, maybe tiredness has creeped in a little bit. His influences have been as great. I think he's been involved a little bit more in his sort of theatrical side and his amateur dramatics more than anything else. I mean, there was that incident in the Belgian game where he got a little clip, went down and got back up like nothing happened after Nicolo Barella scored the opening goal in that game in Munich. It almost feels like, from an England perspective, if Stones and Maguire do play, which obviously it does look like it's going to be 90%, the case, that they can keep Immobile quiet, because he's up front a lot of the time on his own. And it's only when the midfield get it, that's when Chiesa and Insigne get involved, isn't it? And I mean, you could keep Immobile quiet. It's just when it's getting around the sort of last sort of 10, 12 yards in your area, that's almost when he comes alive, isn't it? If you leave him the space to shoot in at goal, isn't it?
It is, yes, and a lot of the time you saw in the game against Denmark, Matt, as well, when the pathway was up through the middle and were causing a few problems for Stones and Maguire, the two centre backs, and Kyle Walker managed to get in behind, get back, use his pace, and get back and help sort that out. So if he does decide to go for a back three, and says Stones and Maguire, one of those two gets pulled out of position by Immobile, we're trying to stop him from having that creative spark inside to have a shot at a goal. Walker then can step behind and cover for for them, which he showed in the last game. Walker's got that pace to get in behind. So if defence can keep tight, whether it's the back three, back four, back five, if we can all like stay together and make sure there's go say, and if we try to put like the two men on Immobile, not let him have the space to turn, have someone just close by. I don't mean foul him. I mean just stand just behind him, make sure he knows you're there, and then try and force him wider, try and force him out wide, and then another of the midfielders players get into the box. And if he looks out wide and there's not that many midfield players in the box, and he's going out wide with the ball and has to cross it in, and we'll stop the wingers from getting in the areas, and we can cut it out and break on them if they can push people forward and break on them. And I think what a key factor in what could be decisive if England get the early goal, Italy will need to come out in the back and we'll have a lot of space in behind we'll have to push forward to support Immobile up front, which then could leave space in behind for us to exploit using the pace of the wingers that we've got. So if we can keep it tight, get an early goal, then keep it tight to the back, using the pace, I think we could have a very good problem. And if we dominate that midfield area with Rice and Phillips dominating, not letting midfield players get that ball and create chances for the front three, Immobile, Chiesa and Insigne, I think we've got a really good chance tomorrow, Matt.
Yeah, very well said indeed. I mean, Barry, let's look at the manager, the man at the helm, Roberto Mancini. He took over Italy in their lowest ebb for around 50, 60 years. Again, I'm alluding to history, but of course, the 2018 World Cup was the first major tournament they had not qualified for since 1958, I believe. So if I am wrong, do correct me. But what a job he's done in just a short space of time. I mean, they're 33 matches unbeaten. I mean, they've won, I think, 13 out of the last 14 matches. Only Spain obviously denied them a win in normal time, extra time. They've only conceded 3 goals in this tournament compared to England. So obviously they're absolutely flying. And considering where he took over them from to where they are now, he deserves so much credit, doesn't he, for the job he's done?
Yeah, it's the best thing that ever happened to him, wasn't it? Not going to the World Cup 3 years ago, because they've taken a step back, they've taken stock. It's a little bit like Gareth Southgate in a way. When you look at the players that he's using and the clubs in which they are playing for, he's not gone necessarily with all the big names at the big clubs. He's got a selection there of players that are mediocre clubs. A little bit like, no disrespect, Russ, but you've got a Leeds United and West Ham United player in the middle of the England setup. Just goes to show that if you drill a little bit deeper in your own country, sometimes you can find a real gem. And he's used a lot of players in his time in charge as well. That's what you've got to remember. I did hear the stat the other week, and it's somewhere in the region of about 60 players he's used. He's tried every formula. He's tried every player. He said, right, there's your chance. And he's shook it all up. And at the end of it, he's come out with a very, very good squad, a very reliable squad, a very good Italian side. And coming into this tournament, they were at best probably a few people's dark horses. They've come through what has been a very good group. They've steered through that. They were on the tougher side of the knockout stages. They've come through that. They've ridden their luck a little bit in the semi-final. I thought Spain played very well, and they needed penalties. But sometimes you've got to keep your cool. And he's also turned to the old guard in Bonucci and Chiellini at the back. And the tried and trusted, and he's built it around that, and he's got the foundations right. And obviously the goalkeeper as well has been very impressive after years and years of a certain man playing in goal for them, that they've had to change that position as well. So he's got the blend of youth and experience absolutely right. I think he's done a fantastic job. He's got a good background team around him. Very, very similar to Southgate in many ways, and I do think he's done a really good job. And you look at the World Cup, which is only just over a year away, and tomorrow Brazil, Argentina in the Copa America. I mean, what's the chances of Italy, England, Brazil, and Argentina being the semi-finalists in the World Cup next Christmas?
Do you fancy putting a belt on for it, Barry?
I will. I did it now. It'll be on the group stages.
Well, I'll have to wait and see. Of course, the World Cup is in sort of 18 months' time in Qatar in 2022. But obviously, we talk about the man management, Nicholas, of Roberto Mancini, and we've spoken about Gareth Southgate. He did say before the tournament that I want to use every single one of my squad as much as I can. He's used 25 of his 26. The only person who hasn't been used there is Alex Mere, who plays for Napoli. He's even used the goalkeeper Salvatore Sirigu, who plays for Torino, because he said the biggest regret was in 1990 he didn't get to play a single minute when Italy, of course, reached the last four, losing on home soil to Argentina. So it just shows that with Southgate, as much as anything else, Italy have got a man's manager rather than a team manager and a fans manager, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, he just wants to pick everybody to play for him, but one might think that might be a bit risky.
In what sort of sense do you might think it's risky? Do you mean, because you look at it from the outside potentially, all these players that he's used, will almost, maybe fall to a sense that, we've always got a chance. We're still in his mindset potentially. And then almost you could almost use it as a sense of it keeps everybody on their toes, doesn't it?
It could do, yes.
Very interesting to say the least. I mean, John, what can you sort of add based on that with Roberto Mancini? Of course, you said that you've been a big follower of Sampdoria in Italy for a long time. He played for Sampdoria during the sort of early 90s, nearly won in the Champions or the European Cup back then with that teammate of his, Gianluca Vialli, who's got on the coaching staff. Of course, they shared a wonderful image, which is one of the images of the tournament, isn't it? When him and Vialli were celebrating against Austria in the round of 16. What are we talking now? 2 weeks ago. I mean, his man management, you could almost say, has been absolutely exemplary. And the way he's conducted himself in this tournament has been, I'd almost say, pretty good himself, hasn't it? He's just very much kind of saying what I was saying earlier, the perfect man to lead his country in any sort of aspect, isn't he?
Absolutely. His man management has been brilliant. I mean, just to note that for me, Roberto Mancini and Vialli, which you mentioned, for me are probably the best striker forwards I've ever seen in my life. Just to put that in there. But I've always followed them all the way through. And then you see Mancini. I mean, people say that Mancini gone to Man City and he won the league with them, and because of the money that Man City spent. But sometimes you have a team full of players, and sometimes it actually gets harder because you're buying all these big names. And then you have to deal with them. And the only way you can deal with them if you have a manager who actually got a good man management, because otherwise everyone will think I'm bigger, and then it goes complete pear-shaped. But Mancini managed to sort out very well at Man City, and now he's doing the same thing in Italy. And like you mentioned, Italy, they were the lowest ranking in FIFA ever, I think, when he took over. And as Barry said, I think what happened with Italy is very similar to what happened with Chelsea. When Mourinho's second stint, when he came back and he won the league, Chelsea were out of all European competitions, and they used that just to concentrate on the league. And the same thing, I think, what happened with Italy. They didn't get the World Cup, and sort of like get them a breather, didn't they? So no one actually was in the last World Cup thinking, he played well, No, Mancini came in and he started from scratch. And I was like, right, who's actually the best players that we got? Not who actually played well in the last tournament, which is what no one, because they weren't even there. And it was a good stepping stone, and he used that very, very well. And he seemed like to picked his best 11, didn't he, when he starts every game?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken about both sides in detail, but I'm going to go to Jack on this one. Of course, Italy haven't lost for 3 years. How they would hope to not lose to England at Wembley tomorrow night. But the big question is, Jack, if you're looking from an England perspective, how do you stop the Italians tomorrow night?
So I think I kind of touched it a bit on it before, how Spain managed to control the game from the midfield point of view. We probably can't do that with the players we have, but we can do it against Germany and shut them down. If England get in the faces of Jorginho and make sure that he's on the ball much further back, let Bonucci and Chiellini play their long balls, which they did quite a bit against Spain in the end, up to Immobile, who he might win the odd one, but I can't see him winning that many headers against Maguire, to be honest, or Stones. So if England can essentially force the Italians into long balls forward, make sure that these excellent, delightful midfield players don't get on the ball. That is how England can stop Italy, and that is how England can win the game. I think it's going to be won or lost in the midfield for me. Obviously, we'll have to see, but for me, it's definitely going to come down to that battle in the midfield.
Mike, have you got sort of anything to add on that? I mean, obviously, we've spoken about it a bit before, touched on it. It does feel like maybe the midfield battle is going to be key tomorrow, who wins and who loses. Anything else that you might think about on the pitch in terms of England, what they've got to do to stop the Italians? I almost feel like, to me, in a sense, that they've got to try and slow the Italians down as much as they can, because we know, as I've mentioned, what they played like in the group stages, they can really turn it on at any given time, can't they?
100%. And that's where England were good against Denmark as well. Of course, it was kind of in England's hands, really, that they were able to just pass it around at their own pace. And if we can do that against the Italians, and kind of slow it down when we need to slow it down, then that'd be a key one. Of course, Raheem Sterling, I mentioned in the chat there as well, that Raheem Sterling will be key for us, I think, because obviously Roman in behind and, getting up there to support Harry Kane. So, kind of getting in behind the Italian back line a bit of Chiellini and Bonucci. And then if you look at the wing backs as well, Kieran Trippier, if he plays, as I see him probably doing so, and Luke Shaw, who of course has been fantastic as well. So I think they'll have a big part to play in England getting over the line if they do, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously you've spoken about the fullbacks there, Russ. I mean, spoken about the midfield, but in terms of both sets of strikers up front, they both certainly know where the back of the net is. Do you almost maybe feel as though that it might come down to the fact that both sides give the strikers the chances? Because we've seen, during the tournament at times, both sides haven't really given the strikers chances, but then at times they have done that. With Immobile, it was at the start of the tournament. With Harry Kane, it's towards the latter end of the tournament, isn't it? So do you almost maybe feel as though that the creative side of both teams really has to shine through during the game tomorrow? And is it going to be a case of which one shines better than the other?
Yes, it could be, Matt. I think at the moment, I saw, obviously you did cover the Italy game against Spain on Tuesday night alongside Nicholas as well. And with Italy in that game, towards the latter stages of the match, prior to it going to extra time, they were tiring out. The players began to become tired, feel a bit leggy, run themselves into the ground towards the end. Whereas when you've watched England, no matter how many minutes are played in a game, whether it's 96, 97 or even 120 like you were against Denmark, England don't seem to run out of steam, and it could potentially be down to who's going to be who's the fittest come the end of the game. Matt, it could be down to that. It could be down to the end of who's going to be the fittest side. And if you look at the squad, England against Denmark, we only used one sub, where Denmark used all five towards the end of the 90 minutes, and then down to the 90, and then they had made one sub in extra time, so used all their lot of six. We still had players fresh. Depends how the managers do it. Say if England only use one sub in the 90 minutes, and then see how it's going, and if it needs to be made change again towards the end, and then if you see who's going to be the better, if you look at how it's going, see who's going to be on top. And I think, as you mentioned about which service the strikers are going to get, I think if you look at the early part, Kane wasn't getting the service as much. We were trying to get Sterling to get the goals, whereas Italy were trying to get Immobile the goals early on in the tournament. Whereas now, England, yes, Kane's getting a few goals now. Sterling's still chipping in with a few, even as well. Whereas Italy, their midfield, they're not relying on the main striker. Now they've got other players chipping in with goals. Whereas early on, they were just Immobile chipping in. Whereas England had goals from all over the place, mainly Sterling in the knockouts, and in other games Sterling were getting involved, other players were getting involved. Whereas Italy had only had Immobile getting the goals early part of the tournament. Whereas now the other players are chipping in, so it could be go down to that as well, Matt. It could be down to the service, plus also which other players step up to the plate and has a good final and see whoever's got the shooting boots on the day. And winning, but I'm still going for the team that I said at the beginning of the tournament. I said it from the podcast before the tournament started. He will come in home, and he will come home tomorrow.
Very, very good point indeed. Asail Camp Post. I think I'm pronouncing that right. If I am not, I do apologise. He said, good the fact that England's 2 goals against Denmark came from Danish errors play a role against England's attacks. Psychology. Cheers from USA. So thank you for that comment. Asail. Remember, of course, we are on the Commentary Hub's YouTube channels, both the Commentary Hub's main channel and the Commentary Hub 2. We're on Mike Harneman's personal YouTube, JB Sports, the Commentary Hub on Periscope, JDAC Football on Periscope, Russ Vernon's Twitch, and the Commentary Live Twitch. I think we've covered everything in terms of where the game could be won and lost and what you expect from both England and Italy tomorrow. And now we move on to what our team of the Euros will be. And of course, it's going to get our pundits' brains working even more so they've had a little bit of time to think, of course, how this is going to work. We're going to use each of our pundits and they're going to take it in turns to determine an 11 and the manager who is the best players from Euro 2020. Of course, we've got Nicholas who's going to bring you the goalkeeper. Russ Vernon will bring you the right back. We've got at the heart of the defence, Barry and Jack picking our 2 centre backs. And of course, at the left back position, Mike Arneman will be picking that. We've got the 3 in the midfield of John, Russ and Nicholas. They'll each be picking a man each. And the wingers, Jack and Barry, will both be deciding that. And then Mike will decide the striker. And then John Kane gets to decide who's the gaffer of this Elite 11 that, of course, we have chosen from the Commentary Hub. So we will get started with that. And of course, you might have heard we had a little guest in the background as well, meowing away in John Kane's camera. So no apologies. I think it's very, very nice. Got a little mascot involved for the third and final podcast. So let's do our team of the Euros. We have concluded off before we started in a 4-3-3 formation. So let's start with goalkeeper then. Nicholas, of course, you're deciding that. There's certainly 4 names for me that spring to mind. Gianluigi Donnarumma, Jordan Pickford, Kasper Schmeichel and Jan Sommer have been the ones who've been standouts for me. Who is going to be the goalkeeper of this Elite Commentary Hub 11 that we are going to decide upon?
I'm going to go for Jordan Pickford.
Jordan Pickford in goal. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your reasons for picking Jordan Pickford then, Nicholas?
Reason being was that he kept the clean sheets for England for such a long time throughout the tournament, right up to the semi-finals. And he also managed to pull off some crucial saves for England when a formidable player on an opposition team was menacing in front of goals. Pickford's certainly one of the cogs in the England machine to send them through to the final.
Absolutely right. Of course, do feel free to comment if you're watching on the various sort of outlets that we are streaming this podcast on. Of course, who do you think should make your team? Who have we not picked out from the list that should have got an honourable mention? There is a few names, of course, that we did receive from just before we did come on air to do this podcast. Of course, do put predictions in. Who you think might start for England? Who you think might start for Italy tomorrow? How do you think the game will be won and lost? We'd love to know your thoughts on the third and final podcast of Euro 2020. Russ Vernon, you get the pick of the right backs. We've got Jordan Pickford in goal to start, a good man, a solid keeper in the sticks to start with. At right back, there's a few names I certainly thought of. Denzel Dumfries of Holland found the back of the net a few occasions. Kyle Walker defensively has been very, very good. Vladimir Soufal has been very, very good for the Czech Republic in this tournament, helping Yaroslav Shahavi's side reach the quarterfinals. They are 3 names. You might have someone within that list, or you might be going for someone completely different. Who is your right back that makes up this team then, Russ?
I've gone for Kyle Walker. And the reason behind that, not just because of his defensive work, he can get forward as well and can put balls into the box. And also when we lose possession and say the centre-backs get caught out of the back, he can get back and get back in. And I'm not going to call him what my dad called him the other day, which you may have heard me mention at half time, but if not, I will mention what he called him. He mentioned during the game against Denmark, he shouted at the TV screen when Walker got back and made a brilliant challenge on our right-hand side. You'll never beat Des Walker. So those who old enough to remember Des Walker, you'll like that one. And he shouted that, and then I was saying it for the rest of the game. And for the tomorrow's match, he's going to be known as Des Walker to me. Well, Kyle Walker is my right back of the choice.
Both pretty quick.
Well, that is a very, very good point indeed. And speaking of Des Walker, he, of course, played centre-back in his heyday, of course. We've got Barry and Jack choosing who's going to be sort of forefronting this defence, of course, as they try to stop any country's attack. If you like, of course, this was a real team then. I'd hope we'd have two very good centre-backs. So I'll go to Barry first. Few honourable mentions. John Stones, Leonardo Bonucci, could say Chiellini, Harry Maguire, even though he's not played every single game of the tournament. Simon Kjaer for his more than his footballing ability this tournament, more for the fact, of course, what an honourable thing he did, an unbelievable thing, of course. Practically saved Christian Eriksen's life, didn't he? You know, in that game against Finland, build a wall to stop the media taking pictures, consoled Eriksen's wife, who was visibly distraught, to the watching world, and of course helped Eriksen in his recovery, turned him on his side, pulled his tongue out. So he's, you could arguably say, the hero of the tournament. But who's the first of our two centre-backs making this team up, Barry?
I don't know. So I'm doing the two centre-halves with Jack, and we're doing the two wingers. We predict everything together, don't we, Jack? We always go for the same thing. So I know what I'm going to do here. I'm going to steal Jack's thunder, so you can do the wingers first, Jack. For me, you know, being an old boy, I love Giorgio Chiellini, and I think what he's done and the way he's defended, the way he goes around celebrating every challenge, every block. I think he epitomises, you know, what Italy are all about. He's a winner. If I open a nightclub tomorrow, I'd want Chiellini and Bonucci on my door. They'd be on my door. No one would be getting in. There'd be no trouble at all. You know what I mean? Jack Grealish would be behind the bar.
Sorry.
That would be some nightclub. But listen, he's a great guy to have at the back there. For me, love him. 37 next month. He's nearly as old as me. Love him. And I know what Jack's going to say now. Go on, Jack.
Well, I was actually going to go for Maguire and Kjaer, to be fair. They were my two. So I'm going.
Our relationship's gone.
Yeah. Sorry, Barry. So we'll go for, if he's gone for Chiellini, I'll go for Simon Kjaer. I think you mentioned it. I think it's more for what he did during that horrendous game. He started CPR. He saved a man's life in that game. And the way he dealt with his wife and the way he blocked off, you know, from the wall, etc. It was just, and the fact that he then came out and led his team out in that game later on. I know they lost in the end, but he was obviously the one who decided to, you know, obviously speaking to Eriksen, decided that they wanted to carry on. And then since then, he was an absolute rock in every single game. I thought he was in their back three, so dominant, such a brilliant leader. So unlucky he got the own goal against England, to be honest. It's a harsh ending for his tournament. But I think Kjaer, not only for his on-field performances, but I think just also for what he did to save Christian Eriksen, I think he deserves to be in there. So Kjaer and Chiellini are the back two, by the looks of it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm not trying to discredit Simon Kjaer for his footballing ability, because he has been a real stalwart at the back for Denmark. I will just try and add that. But of course, I think what he did for Christian Eriksen probably stands out more for the fact of what he did on the pitch. But of course, he helped Denmark reach the last four of Euro 2020. Of course, the furthest they'd reached since they've won it in Euro 1992.
Matt, just to say that, you know, saving a man's life, you know, heaven forbid if the worst happened, this tournament would have been flat, wouldn't it? Without
100%.
with the worst thing happening, you know.
I genuinely think they might have cancelled it. In my opinion,
I think so. Yeah,
I think they would have cancelled it.
It would never have been the tournament. So he's not just saved a man's life. I think he's carried this tournament on single-handedly.
He has.
What he's done. He deserves absolute top credit, and that's what he's getting.
Well, he deserves some sort of recognition from apart from being in our team of the tournament, doesn't he? I mean, whether it's some UEFA award or the FIFA Fair Play Award, something to deserve so much credit for what he did. His quick thinking has essentially saved a man's life, as we've alluded to. So just to recap so far, we've got Jordan Pickford in goal, chosen by Nicholas. We've got Kyle Walker at right back, chosen by Russ. Giorgio Chiellini chosen by Barry, and the other centre-back to make up this team is Simon Kjær. There's a bit of a fearsome team going around here. We've got a left-back choice now, which Mike Harneman is going to do. You can see the tick at the bottom what our team is at the moment. Honourable mentions again, Leonardo Spinazzola, of course, who's been a key man for Italy and them reaching the final. Did play the semi-final, won't play the final tomorrow. Joachim Mæhle has been impressive for Denmark at left wing-back. Luke Shaw, as much as anything else, has been just as good for England. Out of those three, you might even pick someone else. Who is your man to make up being the left-back for our team then, Mike?
This is a really difficult one because I actually could, I could argue for any of them, really. I'm going to give it to Luke Shaw. As I mentioned earlier, I think that he's probably one of the first couple of names on the team sheet now when, he's come in. He didn't play the first game or two for England, but then on the back of that, he come in and he's been really, really solid and really, really good. So, yeah, Luke Shaw will be my left back.
So Luke Shaw makes the left back up in this team. We've got now a three-man midfield. So we've got our best three on the case in John, Russ and Nicholas. Whatever sort of role you play in the midfield as a three is very interesting to see. I think that would be an awesome three in the middle. Of course, should ever the commentary hub make a 11-a-side team or a 7-a-side team or whatever. I mean, there's a shake of the head from Jack Cunningham. I don't think that's ever going to be happening anytime soon. So I'm going to go to Nicholas first, of course. Now, there is a lot of choices you could pick for central midfielders. Some names that really do crop up. Jorginho, as we've mentioned. Jorginho Wijnaldum had a really good tournament for the Dutch. He contributed with a few goals. I think it was 3 in total. The young Spanish midfielder, Pedri, what a tournament he had. Really came to the light of everybody outside Spain. Kevin De Bruyne had a good tournament. Calvin Phillips of England. Paul Pogba shone for France, of course, in their 4 games they played at Euro 2020. So, Nicholas, who is the first of the trio that we're going to go with in the middle of the park then?
I'm going to pick Kevin De Bruyne for Belgium.
Okay, Kevin De Bruyne. Obviously, with De Bruyne in particular, he didn't start the tournament. He was injured, given, of course, feeling the effects of that Champions League final injury of Antonio Rudiger. But I think he showed in the tournament against Denmark in particular, and at times particularly in that Denmark game, he was a real shining light for Denmark, wasn't he? For Belgium, sorry.
That's right, yeah. Despite missing the early part of the tournament with his injury, he came back strong, and but who knows what might have happened had he not been injured and started the whole tournament. Belgium could have actually gone further.
Yeah, absolutely. He got a way up as well. Of course, he did get an injury in that Portugal game in which he had to go off very early on in the second half, but unfortunately his team would be knocked out the quarter-final stage by the Azzurri in Italy. Let's go to John Kane to talk about his next midfielder. He might be going for someone completely different, or he might go for one of the players I've just mentioned. So John Kane, who's going to make up the second part of this 3-man wall in the middle of the park.
Yes, like you mentioned, it's very, very hard, isn't it? Because there's been so many talents out in this tournament, and it's very, very hard to pick. But one of the must players that I've actually hardly been mentioned is Brozovic, from the Croatian player. He's been absolutely fantastic. If you actually watch him against England in all the games, he's more or less, you can see him. He's the player who's controlling the Croatian team, and you can see that when Modric is not doing his job, Brozovic is there behind him doing it. And Modric is going to be his last tournament, but you can see Brozovic is the one who's going to take over that midfield of Croatia. And you look at Brozovic as well. I mean, obviously it's not in this tournament, but he actually was one of the main players for Inter Milan to win the Italian league as well. And his presence was as important as Croatia's advance. Obviously, it needs a whole team to be good, not just one or two players. But you cannot single out a player who's actually been very good for his team, even though they haven't got to the later stages.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, way up as well with Croatia. Ivan Rakitic, who'd retired shortly after their World Cup final appearance. Luka Modric, of course, in his last tournament. They need someone they can rely upon after Modric retires. Marcelo Brozovic could be the man. So that is a very surprise announcement in the team, but certainly does justify his case, I think is fair to say. Let's go to Russ now, who's going to make up the latter part of this 3-man midfield. De Bruyne and Brozovic are the two already in there. We've got Luke Shaw, Kjær, Chiellini and Walker as the back four, Pickford in goal. I think I know who this is going to be. I think I could put my house on it who this is actually going to be. But who's going to be the third man in the midfield then, Russ? And keep it short as well.
Well, for me, one of the three I picked is already in this side. For me, it's going to be two of one who's in the final of now, and for me, I'll probably go for Jorginho.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
That was a real surprise.
Ooh.
Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut and he would have said it
nice.
anyway.
He's throwing everyone.
We've got Russ throwing the curveballs as well now.
That was a real surprise. But what makes you think Jorginho would be in this team then, Russ?
I think he can get he's got Brozovic who can be the holding midfielder, which I know Jorginho has played there as well, and the other choice would have been Phillips, who would play the Brozovic role. So we've already got a holding midfielder. Jorginho under Thomas Tuchel at Chelsea and what he's done in Italy's been a big favourite forward, so he can partner De Bruyne in the attacking sense and then get back and help out at the back with Brozovic. So I think he can get forward and can get back quick. I think that's one of the main reasons why. I think if England, like I mentioned earlier, if England can stop him from playing, we've got a good chance. But if he can plays his good normal game that he plays for the club side and what he's done for Italy so far, Italy may win it if he has a very good game. But I think he, for his defensive and attacking prowess, should be in the team for me.
So Jorginho makes up our three-man midfield along with Marcelo Brozovic, who is John Kane's choice, and Nicholas, who chose Kevin De Bruyne of Belgium. So we now move on to the final three positions. Of course, Barry and Jack have got the luxury of choosing our wingers in the tournament, and there has been some standout wingers, hasn't there? I mean, some honourable names you could mention. Some players that may have actually slipped your notice in the tournament. Emil Forsberg for Sweden hit 4 goals for Jana Andersson's side during the tournament. Mikael Damsgaard, what a player he looked, what a talent. Sampdoria player, scored that free kick against England in the semi-final, scored that wonder goal against Russia in their final group game, which got them into the knockout stages, of course. We mentioned the Italian two of Insigne and Chiesa. We've seen Raheem Sterling, who's been absolutely electrifying in this tournament, hasn't he? Barry went first on centre-back, so Jack goes first on the winger, one of the two choices anyway. Who's our first winger in this team then, Jack?
Right, I'm going to take the right winger spot, and I'm going to go for Chiesa.
Federico Chiesa in the team.
Because he didn't start the tournament in the side. It was Berardi instead. He's had to fight his way in, and every single game he plays, he's direct, he's quick, he's dangerous. He can score with both feet. He can head he was winning headers. He's just got everything about him. He looks like he's going to be an absolute diamond of a footballer, to be honest. And I've got a sneaky feeling he's going to have a say on the final, the way his tournament's gone. So for me, Chiesa on the right. I just think the way that he started, he's had other players have had their favour from the beginning, but he had to fight his way in, and now he's undroppable. So I don't think you can argue with him being in the side, to be fair.
No, I don't think you can. And I think a lot of people listening to the podcast or at home would certainly have put Federico Chiesa in their team. And of course, I mentioned earlier, he just loves playing at Wembley. 2 games in this tournament, 2 goals. Let's hope for our sake. And everybody connected to England, he doesn't score tomorrow. Barry, who's going to make up the last winger position in this team, be the 10th man and the cog of this machine and this unbelievable team that would no doubt win the Henri Delaney Trophy?
I think I've got one of the easier ones here, haven't I? I thought you were going to go for... you've gone with me, by the way, Jack. We're back to normal. I would have gone Chiesa on the right. And no surprise that Raheem Sterling's my choice down the left. And I think he's had a fabulous tournament. You cast your mind back to 2016 when we lost to Iceland, and he was one of the guys that took probably as much stick as anyone else, and he was poor. In my eyes, I felt that was it. He's never going to play for England again. He's just a waste. But he's gone from strength to strength. He's a role model now, and what he's done in this tournament has been magnificent. Nothing short of arguably player of the tournament. Although that honour may well come down to a performance in the final. But if he performs on Sunday night, he may well take that accolade. But either way, even if he plays rubbish on Sunday, he's had a great tournament, and he's got to be Raheem Sterling, I think, down that left-hand side. That was the easy one. And the left-back position was probably a little bit more difficult because of a multitude of very good wing-backs. And, of course, you are looking at wing-backs here, so it's difficult to bring the wingers in. But, yeah, definitely Raheem Sterling.
So we have 10 of our 11. Just to recap, we have Jordan Pickford in goal, chosen by Nicholas. We have Kyle Walker at right back, which was chosen by Russ. Giorgio Chiellini and Simon Kjaer were chosen by both Barry and Jack Cunningham. Luke Shaw slots in as left back, with Mike Harneman choosing that. Kevin De Bruyne was one of our three-man midfield. Nicholas was in position to choose that. Marcelo Brozovic, a real surprise choice to go in the middle of the park, but certainly a lot of justification based off that. John Kane was our man choosing that, and then Rush chose the Italian maestro. Jorginho has been a real key influence for the Azzurri in this tournament. And then Barry and Jack were both choosing the wingers. Federico Chiesa was Jack's choice, and Barry chose Raheem Sterling. Mike Harneman gets to choose who our number 9 will be, or number 10, whoever you like to see them play. Of course, there's some honourable mentions you can mention. Karim Benzema, a lot of people didn't forget how well he did in this tournament. 4 goals for him, 2 against Portugal, of course, and he found the back of the net against Switzerland twice as well. Harry Kane could get top goal scorer like he did at the World Cup 3 years ago. He's got 4. Kasper Dolberg for Denmark hit 3. Lukaku found the back of the net 3 times, as Cristiano Ronaldo got 5. Of course, surpassed the previous record and being the European Championship record goal scorer. And Patrick Schick is currently the joint top scorer as well on 5 from the Czech Republic. He was vital for Yaroslav Shohavi's side as they reached the quarterfinals. So, Mike, who is going to be up front in our team?
So, for me, I've gone with Kasper Dolberg.
Okay.
Getting 3 goals. If you look at his passing accuracy, he had a 79% passing accuracy as well. When he only played 4 matches as well, and he got 3 goals within that time. Of course, scoring in the quarterfinal as well, what turned out to be the winning goal in the end. So he can get in there alongside, of course, the fellow Dane, Simon Kjaer, who's already in there as well. So that could be another one that obviously he can know about as well. And obviously, no, John, it isn't just I couldn't put Harry Kane.
Certainly no Arsenal or Tottenham allegiances here, but you've got to weigh into the fact as well. Kasper Dolberg probably deserve a bit of recognition given the fact he's had a pretty poor couple of seasons with Nice in France, and the Euros have pretty much propelled him. Scored against Wales, scored quite a good goal if I remember rightly in Amsterdam, and of course scored twice. Scored against Czech Republic as well in Baku last Saturday in their quarterfinal win over the Czech Republic. We now need a gaffer for this team. We need to find the man who's going to get the best out of these group of players, of course. Before we get our choice, we do sort of pick up some names. Gareth Southgate has done a tremendous job with England. Kasper Hjulmand with Denmark in his first major tournament has taken the Danes on a different platform with a different style of play compared to Age Hareide. Yaroslav Shohavi, of course, the Czech Republic manager. And Andrei Shevchenko took Ukraine to the quarterfinals of the European Championships for the first time in their history. Of course, he was a player when they reached the World Cup quarterfinals in 2006, and he's held as probably Ukrainians' greatest ever footballer in their country, and of course has cemented himself pretty much, you could say, as a manager. So John Kane gets to choose who our gaffer is, and who do you think would be our manager of this 11 then, John Kane?
Obviously, like you mentioned, there have been quite a lot of good managers in this tournament, from Denmark, Italy, England. And I'm not going to take any credit out of any of them. And you have to choose just that one manager. And I'm going to choose one of the managers who actually got to the final, and that is Roberto Mancini. Okay. I think what Mancini did with this squad that he got, and if you look at it, when he brought this team to this tournament after not being in the World Cup before and being the worst Italian team ever in any FIFA ranking. And he brought in players, if you look at it, like you mentioned, the 34, the 35, the 23. He actually looked at how the players were performing for their clubs, rather than actually on, right, I'm going to start with 23 down and do a new build. No, he actually stuck with, right, this is the best dude for those centre-backs. This is the best defender. This is 2 best wingers and strikers. And I'm not taking anything away from Gareth Southgate, which for me will probably be close second. But I think Mancini's also that winning mentality as well that he actually got. Let's not forget, he won the league with Man City. He won the league with Inter Milan 3 times, I believe. So he's got that bit more how to deal with things more than probably any other manager that has been in this tournament. But again, I'm not taking away anything out of the Danish, the Czech, or the English managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could certainly make a case for where Mancini took Italy over from in 2018 to where they are now. I mean, it is a pretty phenomenal thing that he's achieved. So that is our 11. And our manager that was chosen, just to recap, it's Jordan Pickford in goal. 4 at the back, Kyle Walker, Giorgio Chiellini, Simon Kjaer and Luke Shaw as the defence. 3-man midfielder Kevin De Bruyne, Marcelo Brozovic and Jorginho, Federico Chiesa and Sterling are our 2 wingers, with up front being Kasper Dolberg of Nice and Denmark, and Roberto Mancini is our gaffer. If you like our team, then let us know. If you don't like our team and you'd include different players, then feel free to let us know. Of course, we will be putting out our sort of choices or our nominees on our Twitter page tomorrow if you are following us, or of course, if you're not, then please do follow us at Commentary Live 1. The page is called the Commentary Hub. Of course, leave comments in there who you'd want to be in the team. If we've forgotten people, then do let us know. Of course, Luke Turton spoke to us just before we came on air. He said the likes of Tomáš Holeš for Czech Republic, really unsung, important for the Czechs during the tournament. Robin Gosens for Germany, how important he was at left wing back. Briel Mbolo for Borussia Mönchengladbach in Switzerland, of course, as well. And also including Nico Elvedi. But that is all we have got time for on our final podcast of Euro 2020. My thanks go to my guests of Russ Vernon, Mike Arnhem, Nicholas Jones, Barry Swain, John Kane and Jack Cunningham. So it all comes down to this tomorrow at Wembley Stadium, 8 o'clock, England versus Italy. And certainly for all of our here in this chat, it's certainly the first time we have seen England in a major final before. Wherever you're watching, whether it's at home, at work, or in the pub, enjoy yourself. And of course, make sure that we'll be toasting a victory tomorrow. And let's hope that the song is true, that football is coming home. And just before we leave you, we're going to leave you with a real nice part of this show, like nice thing to end with. And it's one of our very own JB or John Stuttard giving us a very good rendition of Sweet Caroline. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, to our coverage this year and for the tournament altogether. We will see you again tomorrow. 7:30 we start. John Stuttard, or JB as he's known, is on hosting duties. Justin Hoyt is on co-commentary. Russ Vernon and Mike will be bringing you the commentary of the Euro 2020 final, England against Italy. And it's time to bring you a little bit of John Stuttard singing Sweet Caroline. Bye for now.
Where it began, I can't begin to knowing, but then I know it's growing strong. Woo! Was in the spring, as became the summer, who would have believed you come along? Hands, touching hands, reaching out, touching me, touching you. Sweet Caroline, ba 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 bum. Good times never seem so good, so good, so good, so good. No.